Hey, I'm Christopher Glyer,
I'm Nick Carr.
and we're here with Alex Landstein for State of the Hack. Today is our take two. We tried to do it yesterday from the conference room floor, or the conference floor, and had a little technical difficulties with the, I think bandwidth was maybe an issue.
Yeah, so we wanted to re-record it and send it out to you guys because I think we talked about some pretty interesting things. But before we get started, let's get started. Cheers. So we're joined here by Alex Landstein. So what we try to do on State of the Hack is talk about a lot of targeted activity that we're seeing and different campaigns we're responding to and providing more of that information. But we don't really talk about how we get to that point or where some of the data comes from. And frankly, in a lot of cases, Alex is identifying it. So could you give a little bit of your background and maybe how long you've been at the company?
Sure. So I've been here for almost 11 years. I've had pretty much every job at the company. So I started out in QA, and then I went over to labs where I built a lot of our malware processing backend, some that's still in use today. And then I worked on some of our cloud sharing services, sharing indicators between products. So basically, I know where all the bodies are buried from a data perspective. So I'm a pretty good guy for helping people figure out how to navigate through our data, how to pivot, how to find interesting things that might not be super apparent up front.
I like Nick's analogy the other day of a little bit of Alex is included in every one of our products. So
Yes. But no, so you're kind of in that support role for kind of everyone?
For everybody, yeah. Yep. So I fall into the support organization. And so that means supporting, first and foremost, obviously customers. FireEye, Mandiant, iSight have sort of a core group of customers who will almost always be our customers because of the data we're able to share with them, as well as some of the unique capabilities we have around detecting targeted threats. So my first role is dealing with customers who are persistently compromised or targeted over the course of many, many, many years, and we have just a very good relationship. And for some of those types of customers, working through the normal support channels doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for helping with understanding a specific indicator, a piece of malware, an ID, a domain. Some of these people deserve and need a little bit more of a direct line into the company. So that's sort of my first role for support. My second role is supporting our internal sales engineers of helping them understand the way the products actually work. Certainly our marketing glossies are great for how our email product works, but a lot of times they need more technical detail about, an attachment comes in, what happens between the attachment and the alert being generated, and how is that different than other tools that are on the market?
I thought it was just magic.
It is magic.
Attachment comes in magic and then pops out.
Actually, our slides used to say that, literally the magic of MBX, but no more. So we want our sales engineers to understand exactly how our products work. So that's the second group I support. And then the third group is the internal intel people and the research people who might have come to us through Mandiant or through iSight or through Invitas, and they need a little bit of help understanding where the appliances actually send the data and how you access that and how you search through different fields and what different things mean. So I'm always helping out the intel teams, helping them find interesting threats.
So a lot of the times my day starts with a message from you. So I'm imagining you're kind of starting the day getting in, sifting through some of this data because you have cool stuff at like first thing in the morning.
Right. Yeah, so it's the first hour or two of my day, every day. And what I do, so we have a few different service models you can buy. One of which, and we'll give you a discount if you do it, you share your indicators with us. So that's when you discover a malicious email attachment, that will share it back into our backend. So we get a copy of whatever your device is saying is malicious. And then we have another service level where we will go in and look at every single one of your alerts in a deeper fashion. So I sort of do that on our backend. So essentially when any email product or any network product sends something up to us, we get a lot of telemetry about what's happening at time zero across our customer base. So thousands of customers, and we're getting on the order of millions of attachments per day. But it's actually a pretty manageable number to try to find outliers in that and then examine each one.
So how do you sift through? I mean, if it's millions of, how do you know what's valuable or interesting or?
Exactly. Yeah. So there are a few pre-filters that I apply. So essentially, targeted threat activity happens in sort of smallish clusters, and the cluster might be law firms, or it might be ministries of foreign affairs, or it might be certain types of technology makers. But if we see an attachment that's sent to an EDU and a cereal maker and someone who makes hot dogs and a government and an electronics, if you're seeing it across a wide variety of customers at a fairly high volume, you can ignore all that stuff. So very quickly, not ignore, a threat against the organization could either be sort of scattershot, where there's lots of malware that goes on in the wild, distributed through spam bots and sort of spray and pray actors. And then there's malware or backdoors that are targeted by a person. Now, it doesn't, whether the person is an individual hacker, works for a government, or financially motivated, sort of not necessary to figure out at this point. We're just trying to figure out, was there a person trying to target you to compromise you?
Are they somebody who's like hands on keyboard or has a different motivation?
Right. So now you're going from millions of attachments per day to on the order of 50,000. So 50,000. So that's like unique by name and unique by hash, and weeding out all the stuff that looks like spam. And that's actually a pretty manageable number. With 50,000 attachments, you can scroll through those with your eyes within an hour or two. You're literally just eyeballing things, and you can really start to see like spam campaigns that you didn't know about before. So you start to see like purchase order spam or DHL shipping notifications or tax stuff, and then you can like very quickly just whitelist all that stuff out. You start whitelist and whitelist and whitelist and whitelist, and then you end up with maybe 100 different things that you want to look at. Those 100 things could be targeted, or they could be false positives. And either way, I'm going to do something about it. If it's a false positive, obviously we want to fix those proactively. If it's targeted, we want to make sure that we have detection up and down the kill chain, or whatever you want to call it. So let's say we successfully detect a malicious Word document, but let's make sure we detect whatever payload is going to drop on disk, and then whatever the command and control channel is going to look like from that sample. If we don't detect it, we want to work with the different products, the endpoints, the network, the email product, both to have detection for some of those other parts of the chain, as well as like properly identify the threat. Our product in general is very good at determining generically whether something's bad. So let's say an Excel spreadsheet comes in. If Excel somehow manages to download and execute something, or if Excel manages to like execute PowerShell like an encoded command, that's bad. It's bad with very high efficacy. So that's easy to do, or fairly easy to do. But figuring out whether that was targeted is much more of a human process. Yeah. So that's how I start every morning, looking at every single attachment that comes in and URL that come in across our customer base, looking for outliers.
It's funny, it kind of reminds me, so when I started at Mandiant 8 years ago, I was sitting with Nick Harbour and talking about kind of scrolling through lots of things, and it really impressed me because he was able to just like take a file listing of a system and in Encase or whatever product was, just scrolling, and could literally just like look and then he'd be like, that's malware. And like, as a kind of brand new person doing IRs, I had no idea how but like, once you've been doing it for a long time, you can just kind of, that something stands out, or that you can't always describe why, but it's weird how once you've been doing it for a while, that gets a lot easier.
And science that you perfect so much that kind of looks like an art, and a little bit of style to it. Yep.
Same with your daily going through every comp script let on.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, so maybe you want to talk about some of the stuff that you found recently that's led into a few larger company efforts. So one that comes to mind is some of the sort of targeted activity against Southeast Asian entities. He walked through how we got there. We actually spun up a community protection event for that. I believe we've talked about those past episodes.
Maybe worth going over, just give it an overview again.
Sure, yeah, so it's like, if there's a campaign that we identify across multiple customers, or something that is a global event that may affect our customer base, we spin up these community protection events. They sort of have dedicated resources from the different groups within the company that are focusing on some of the things you talked about, making sure we have resilient detection for some of these things, that we have methodology-based indicators for what they might do next, and as well as put out more intelligence around it, and just overall customer awareness. So in this particular case, what was going on with this activity that we eventually tied to sort of Southeast Asian targeting from, I believe we believe it's suspected Chinese attacker doing so?
Sure. Yeah. So I have a few different buckets of things that I look at, and one of them is password protected content. So we have a variety of ways of brute forcing passwords to archives and to documents, ripping things out of emails and using dictionary tags and using. So
this would be where I think a lot of times about ransomware campaigns, or some of those invoice things where they're going to email a password to people, and a lot of times like a couple character numeric password. Mm-hmm. So we're pulling those out and plugging that in. And
yeah, exactly. And we're able to guess passwords at a pretty high rate.
Okay.
But in the global scheme of things, we don't see that many password protected things that we think are malicious in a given day. You know, it's on the order of, I don't know, maybe 1,000 unique things. So you can really go through those very quickly. Most of the time, it's people sharing malware with like the password infected. And when a password sticks out, it sticks out very, very easily. You know, target attackers sometimes they will use a numeric password. You know, there's a Chinese campaign that was 5 8s, I think, that went on for a long time. But you know, Agenda 2018 or DPRK sanctions, or they pick a password that's somewhat interesting. So you just go through all those. So in this case, with password picked a zip file, look at anyway. But inside, LNKs are a very rare. There are a few different files.
These were pretty weird too, because they reminded me of the really old malware that was, you know, filename.doc.exe, and these were, you know, filename.doc.lnk, and people just shortcut files.
Yes, it was LNK pulled down a remote file from LNK and then executed on disk.
So it had these shortcuts are pretty interesting. They have like the that it launches, and then it references itself and actually has another encoded power. So it has two kind of blobs of data. The weirdest part was as we're tracking the use of these, and it kind of feels like another group, again, this suspected Chinese group, got their hands on something that was used by other attackers. So the generic detections online on VirusTotal, one or two of them have been uploaded to VT, and other vendors identify them as like cozyduke.gen.lnk or something like. They tied back to the APT29's U.S. election targeting.
Links,
yeah. So that was, I think, the Spike Rush malware right around there, a really targeted campaign. We haven't seen it since then, and then all of a sudden, this same builder is pretty interesting.
And then its persistent mechanism was the starter folder, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So you drop the link in the starter folder. 1998
style persistence of malware, you know, in the auto runs. In the starter folder.
It's funny that you actually don't see that super often. Generally when I see it, it's just you can guarantee that you're gonna have you can always write to there because it's user writable and executable from there. So when I usually see if I'm triaging a system or doing forensics on a system and I see persistence mechanism and they're using the starter folder, that's generally a pretty good indication that you're very early in the attack lifecycle or first phase because they're not going to have privileges yet to create something that's privileged or would take admin privilege. So using the starter folder is generally an indication. Obviously, if you found it through email or something else, that'd be a good one. But if you were coming the other way and you found it through forensics, then that's usually a pretty good idea that that's maybe patient zero.
Yeah, and it's a pretty. It's definitely not a perfect way to evade sandboxes, but it's certainly one of the ways that people will drop something and then wait for the system to reboot before it executes. A lot of these people are pretty patient and they don't want their malware to run right away. So
they just move the link file into the starter folder and then let it
happen. And then do nothing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Pulling down. I didn't know prior to this that a link file could actually pull in remote site content.
Yeah. Yeah, the multi-stage attacks are what will always be, and it makes sense. I think I have to imagine it's going to be frustrating as you're looking through all the documents every day. A lot of the really targeted stuff is just downloaders, right? They just download a remote payload.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that's because they don't want their payload to get out. And we've seen a few different variations of that. We've seen Word documents that come in and the payload is encrypted in the Word doc, but you can only decrypt it with the host name of the person who's targeted. Or we've seen it where when you launch the Word document, it's pulling down a remote flash file or a second half of an exploit, and before they give you that second half, they're going to profile you. So there's a pretty decent campaign. There's some of the dealer's choice stuff. If you don't have the right version of Flash, they know that their targets are going to be fully patched, so it checks your Flash version. And if you don't have the latest Flash version, that means you're not my target, which means I'm not giving you the exploit, or I'm not giving you the good exploit. So there's all sorts of different ways that they use to selectively compromise people, but really just hold on to as much of the exploit chain as they can to keep it out of the hands of researchers.
It's actually kind of nice the way the stuff that some of our stuff is set up around guardrails that attackers put in their malware delivery, where it's checking for certain egress IPs and stuff like that. Running it live on an appliance that's located at a client.
We have a much higher chance of actually catching that bad content versus trying to access it from some other IP address that they may ignore.
Yeah,
for sure.
Sweet. So I also know, I thought you sent over some APT 19 stuff that we kind of spun up and put out an intelligence piece on.
So
It was kind of weird.
Yeah, for context, 19 is a Chinese nation-state group that we've been tracking for
Yeah, and
several years. Yeah.
if people aren't familiar, for sure check out the APT 19 targeting law firms post. I think we put out a blog post last year. So those guys are kind of back and doing the same stuff.
Yeah, if you like that blog post, any signatures you would have derived from looking at that blog post would have triggered on this recent campaign, which was maybe 2 weeks ago, and it started on a Monday. It's pretty typical for 19. They'll, on the first day, they'll target a couple different law firms, and they'll sort of see. Actually, I don't really know what they're doing on the back end, but if I were them, I would see how the detection was going and whether I was successful. And then there's a day or 2 day gap, and then they target a lot more different law firms, but typically the same law firms over and over again. So we have a pretty good collaboration with the number of law firms that get targeted, and we always do proactive notifications as soon as we see the first one go out.
There's probably going to be a big wave or something else.
Yeah, and then they've really got a pattern, they stick to it. But yeah, they didn't really change up their obfuscation algorithm of their so it's a macro. Pretty typical. We're seeing less and less exploitation in general.
Why do you think that is? Or is there is that just been a general trend over the last couple of years? Or
Definitely been a general trend. It's probably partially that vendors themselves are getting a lot better at pushing out patches. Adobe will put out a patch. It seems like the day after an exploit's made public, whereas previously it used to be a month or 2 months. And then enterprises themselves are a lot better at doing patching of Windows, patching of third parties. So exploits just have from a patch perspective, exploits have a lot less of a life cycle.
Yeah, actually, there was a Adobe Zero Day that happened recently.
Flash the Korean.
Right, and we totally expected a bunch of other groups to use it, and it was like crickets. Like we didn't really.
Super convoluted. I think it was really hard to get this stuff to run properly and target.
Right. And then obviously on the endpoint side, there's a lot more endpoint tools that are good at generically detecting exploitation. There's a few surefire things that happen a lot of times in modern exploitations, whether they're heap sprays, like looking for big chunks of memory, they're like OC, they're like 90, 90, 90, like you see like 64K repeating chunks in the heap. Right. There's that stuff. There's looking for a generic shellcode execution, like looking for Windows APIs called by specific part, typically returning to the heap. There's
rock chain stuff.
Yeah, there's there are a bunch of things that most modern exploits do. Typically, some sort of process crash.
Whereas macros, as long as you have a finance department, is what I say. But as long as you have it,
you get the person to say and enable this content, right?
Yeah, and they find a lot of different ways of
tricking people into thinking that there's something wrong, like you can't view this font correctly or something, and
So with that, we obviously give for the APT 19 stuff, we give law firms a heads up. Is there anything you do then? Are you kind of keeping a closer eye on their appliances, or?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in that couple day gap between the first phase and the second phase, they basically change up nothing about the attack. You would imagine that, and we're not trying to troll a nation state group here, obviously, but you would imagine that these targeted threat groups are going to modify absolutely everything for every run, because a lot of defenders really overestimate some of the attackers on the other side, and there are certainly some very advanced groups, both Chinese and Russian and other countries, but they really do the bare minimum for whatever's going to work. If the document hasn't made it onto VirusTotal by now, and maybe even if it has, in this time, so there's a 2 or 3 day gap in between the two runs. They didn't change anything. They didn't change the sender address. They didn't change even the hash of the attachment. Certainly, obviously, the C2. They changed nothing.
I guess the equivalent of kicking the tires and maybe confirming that things got stopped is a little bit odd. But
yeah, I mean the way that I generally try to think about that is, if I gave you $10 million and said, go build a program to break into one organization and stay in forever, the types of things you do from a tooling and infrastructure and everything else would probably look very, you try and change up as much as you can because you have one target, sure. Right? But if I give you that same $10 million, but say now you need to get into 1,000 targets, and you may get different taskings at different times, right. And now you're resource constrained, so you're only gonna step up the kind of minimal necessary where you have to, and not devote resources to things.
And honestly, we're victims of we're held to our telemetry. For all we know, they're getting into other law firms that weren't protected, and that's why they kept doing it.
Well, we know they are, because then a few days after that, another law firm that we track on VirusTotal, who's not a customer, then uploaded the documents.
There you go. So what are they using for their phishing lures? Isn't it kind of weird?
Well, so this time it was like one of them was like a Me Too type situation. Like one governor had been accused of people of some sort of inappropriate activity. But the last run, just maybe like 2 months ago, it was all like what we would consider like right wing lures. So they would take names of articles from like the Gateway Pundit and from like Zero Hedge and from Fox News and like a few things like that. And it was all like Clinton uranium1.docm or FBI agent was killed by the Clinton campaign to cover up something. So they know how to get people to click, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So this time was not right leaning at all. It was just totally different lures. One was even like it was targeting like accountants. Maybe not at the law firm, but it was an accounting lure. It was talking about some spreadsheet.
A new FASB standard or something, right?
Yeah, it was like comma delimited something. Yeah, but they're pretty good at getting people to click. But again, if they're not successful, there's not a whole lot of downside. Maybe they get embarrassed a little bit, but they're not getting arrested. So
nice.
Do the minimum.
Yeah. Well, I forgot to mention when we were talking about the targeting of Southeast Asian entities, like the kinds of mailboxes those are being sent to, right? Weren't they sent to personal accounts?
Yeah, they were sent to like their Yahoo addresses and Gmail addresses and things that, if you have, say a secure email gateway that's protecting your email at your corporation, a great way to get around that is to target, a victim's personal email. And, because they're going to be opening it potentially on their, work asset, whether it's a Mac or or whatnot. And that's a real tough one because you're completely blind to that as a victim organization, right? You don't have any visibility into someone's Yahoo or Gmail or Hotmail or whatever your favorite one is.
Yeah, it's kind of a totally untested vector, literally not tested because you can red team all day, but typically that's not a part of a red team. Is targeting someone's personal mail for infection. I think it might be illegal depending on
and it's pretty rare. Like I don't. Because, you need quite a bit of information, right? You need to be able to say, like, okay, well, I want to target Nick Carr, and then I need to then do open source research and find out, like, what potentially your maybe it's easy, I don't know. But
sure. The best example of it to me is the APT 28 activity from, 2016, 2017, when they targeted the vast number of people's personal accounts of sort of VIPs.
Yeah, I think we'd seen APT 1 do that kind of back in the day. But it's definitely the exception, not the norm.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, just on that 28, this wasn't part of the agenda, but so this campaign maybe 3-4 weeks ago, really you could start to see some of the minds of the way that the attackers operate. So it was typically targeting like mostly Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We're a big customer of ours, so a lot of them are in some of our more advanced services, so we actually get copies of all their mail, and we can just look at everything as it comes in and do a little bit more of a deep dive. So we saw 2 or 3 different Ministry of Foreign Affairs targeted, and within the same minute, so it's clearly the same attacker, but one of the people got a malicious Word doc or Excel spreadsheet, I forget which had a flash file, and it was the typical dealer's choice, which is one of the toolkits they use to compromise people, and it delivered the exploit, and that was all well and good. And the other person got a password-protected Word document, okay, and the flash file was on the 3rd page. So unless you open the Word document and scroll to the 3rd page, the flash wouldn't execute to then pull down that same remote content. So it's 2 targets within the same minute, same actor, same everything. So I don't know if they're like testing which one is more.
It's like A/B testing, but for
it's A/B testing. That's exactly what it is. So it's pretty interesting to see that.
I love the Russian techniques all the time. Just piloting 1 or 2 new techniques during a campaign and testing out to see if it works and roll it in.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool. One other thing I wanted to talk about, we chatted about a little bit yesterday, was some of the emerging nation-state attackers. And I know you've been working with like Barry Vendrick and the Intel team as well on some of that activity. It's kind of cool because it's countries maybe people wouldn't think of as having a capability.
Sure, yeah. It's obviously cyber is a lot cheaper than using humans for espionage. So one of the groups we've been tracking is we believe out of Kazakhstan. So obviously when you're doing attribution, there's sort of different levels of confidence of, hey, it could be down to this person if they make a bad enough mistake, or you sort of get a gut feel about it's probably this country, and maybe we don't need to go deeper than that. And in this case, this group was in Kazakhstan. And the reason that we said that So one of the original C2s from like a first stage malware, the C2 is registered by a Kazakhstani domain registrar, or registered through a Kazakhstani domain registrar, which you might say, okay, that's kind of strange. It's
So like a .kz.
Yeah, .kz, yeah. So, which, okay, maybe that's a little strange, but who knows? Maybe the domain was stolen. Maybe there's a lot of things that could happen. And then, but the second stage used an IP, and the IP was hard coded through SWIFT, the Shared Whois Information Project, the SWIFTs. It was SWIFT to a Kazakhstani organization. It was hosted in Kazakhstan. And we see very few C2s, especially like a second stage, sort of more persistent C2 hosted in Kazakhstan. It's kind of a weird country, and you know, a lot of like firewalls and stuff like that will allow you to do like country-based blocking for reasons like this. But we didn't really see that. So you might say, okay, domains registered in Kazakhstan, IP.
Maybe a false flag. I don't know.
Yeah, sure, could be, you know, the Georgians and the Moldovans or the Latvians or whoever. But then on one of their C2s, they had an open directory. So open directory, okay, and all their source code was public. So I'm not going to say the text editor, but one of the text editors that they used, when you write the file, it changes the extension. Like it has like a temp file that it'll write to. So you'll get the main file, but you also get like a backup. And that backup file didn't have a CGI handler, so when you clicked on it, you got their actual source code. So like
nice.
that's like, yeah. So now you have your source code, and it's all in a Cyrillic language set. Okay, all right. But again, maybe false flag, you know.
A lot of work to be false flag, but okay.
Yeah, there's other people who write in Cyrillic, but you know. Also in their source code, which we didn't log into, but would have been really easy, was their MySQL database credentials, which had a copy of all their targets and all their victims. Not their targets, but it had a copy of, it would have had a copy of their victims. So you probably could have inferred, well, because they're our customers, we can just look and see who was targeted.
Right.
And across the board, it was like the ambassador for Kazakhstan at Name Your Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it was, you know, certainly nothing's perfect in terms of attribution, and we're not taking people to court, and we're not a government, but you could sort of get a gut feel for, okay, this is probably who it is.
Nice.
So, yeah, so Barry actually named their malware. So I think in one of their strings they called it like RoboRat. So Barry named it RoBoRat, which was a good variation.
Cool. Yep.
I think that's an example of what you like to call gov on gov love, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Awesome. Well, I guess since we last did the episode, since we last did an episode that you might see, we released the M-Trends 2017 report. I definitely recommend people check that out. It's available like ungated on the website, and it's the recap of the 600 or so investigations we did in the past year. So I'm just curious, because I know you've been talking to various people here, if there's any trends you wanted to highlight before we wrap up today on what we've seen in that report, things people should look out for.
You know, I think two of the bigger ones, there was a big uptick between 2016 and 2017 in the median number of days compromised from, so, you know, we track like, you know, when an attacker breaks into when it was detected either internally or through like a victim notification or something. And there was a big uptick between 2016 and 17 in both, you know, EMEA and in Asia. And you know, I think what that's actually reflective of is different governments in Asia and Europe are actually starting to get a lot more, you know, into the cyber game and actually starting to, you know, notify a lot more victims. And so they're then finding these kind of latent attacks that have been there for a long time. So I think that was a large part of the reason. One of the other interesting stats was the time, if you find it internally, our clients or customers in Europe actually were finding things internally took about half the time as in the Americas, which I thought was another interesting kind of comparison.
Sure.
You know, in terms of two of those stats.
I was pleased to see the number of clients that we broke it down with like high level of granularity, but people that had found it within a couple days or a week. That's somewhat encouraging. Obviously, our data set is kind of skewed.
Well, I guess the way I would call it is we have inherent sample bias in the data, but the sample bias is at least consistent, right? You know, if you have a phishing email that gets blocked, you're probably not going to call Mandiant to do an investigation. You know, or if you caught it day one, we can, but it's probably not going to do a lot. You know, or if you caught it on the first day and you know can push the attacker out, you're probably not going to give us a call. So, you know, we're not going to see those types of attacks. But what we are going to see is ones that are either there for a longer period of time or have gotten to a stage that are harder to evict, or maybe are unknown. We did a compromise assessment and found something. So the data is at least consistent. And you know, one of the other trends was kind of the median time from breach to discovery, it's gone down pretty steadily since we started publishing these stats in 2011. I think it started around like 400 and some days in 2011, and has really come down to about 100-ish days, and it's been pretty consistent. So last year was 99, and this year was 101.
Awesome. So we're just about at the end of our show today, but just wanted to let you know maybe some of the things we'll talk about next time, or the other stuff we're dealing with. A lot of attackers are active. The global pace is always challenging to keep up with. So we're seeing a lot of Iranian activity, APT 34 and APT 35. Fairly active right now.
Fin 6.
Fin 6 across a couple clients. Fin 10 doing something a little bit interesting, where the way that they're infecting people. Maybe we'll talk about that next time. So just some unique ways to get around detection. And speaking of detection, the one thing to look out for, I guess, over the next, until we do the next episode, is going to be Squibbly 2, in my opinion, the UAC bypass released by Casey Smith.
Yeah, I think that's something we picked up.
Especially those emerging nation state groups that pick up on it. Everyone wanting to use these publicly available frameworks to avoid attribution in their early stages. This would be a very sensible thing for groups to be adopting quickly and using. So we'll keep trying to share stuff out at FireEye, different methods, interesting things we see. I think someone on the team, Steve Miller on the team, has been sharing out daily PCAP. Interesting things we're responding to in attacker methods, so we'll try to do that.
We'll definitely pick up on what we've seen if Squibbly 2 is starting to be picked up or used in the next month.
Exactly. Well, thanks again for joining us, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.